By the time that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth comes to an end, even though it answers a lot of questions raised in Remake, it raises just as many, if not more, for things yet to come in the Remake's trilogy's conclusion. As this new tale continues to expand and change more and more, questions about where it's headed and how it will end become much more prominent. Rebirth does an excellent job of tantalizingly teasing you with these questions. Here, we're going to talk about some of the biggest mysteries that are left lingering after Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's story draws to a conclusion. Note, there are major spoilers ahead for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Is Sephiroth from the future? This is something that fans have been asking since Final Fantasy VII Remake first came out, and though we still don't have a definitive answer, it is certainly becoming increasingly obvious. Over the course of 2 games, and especially in Rebirth in particular, Sephiroth is shown to be very much aware of the events of the original Final Fantasy VII, while in Rebirth he obviously also knows about the multiverse's existence, even having manipulated Cloud & Co. into defeating the Whispers in Remake. So, what does that tell us about Sephiroth and the nature of his very existence? Based on everything that we've seen of him in the Remake's trilogy so far, it does seem like this is perhaps a post-Advent Children version of the character who managed to find his way back to the beginning of the original game's events and started messing with time to try and change his fate. After all, he's made it abundantly clear on no few occasions by now that he wants to defy destiny, so it stands to reason that he knows what destiny it is exactly that he's defying. Will Zack survive? Seeing Zack fare at the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake was a big shock, and seeing him survive the fateful encounter that ends in his death was an even bigger one. In Rebirth, it is revealed that by defeating the Whispers, the party inadvertently caused the creation of multiple different timelines, including the one where we see Zack still alive and heading to Midgar with a Mako-poisoned Cloud. Throughout the game, he continues to have an important role to play, even briefly overlapping with the main timeline to fight against Sephiroth side by side with Cloud. And in the aftermath, it's clear that his goal is to find a way to join his world with the main timeline. But is Zack going to come out of this whole thing alive? A big theme in Final Fantasy VII Remake's trilogy so far is that one way or another, no matter how hard you try, destiny cannot be defied. Characters have, one way or another, ended up meeting their fates the way that they were supposed to. In Zack's timeline, Biggs survived the fall of Sector 7 but eventually ended up dying anyway. In Remake, Wedge survived longer than he did in the original FF7 but was still eventually pushed to his death by the Whispers. And of course, at the end of Rebirth, Cloud tries his damnedest to save Aerith, and for a brief moment, it even looks like he succeeded. But she too ends up dying at Sephiroth's hand, just as she was always supposed to. So are Zack's attempts at finding a way to avoid his death going to be futile? In its final act, Rebirth shows us 2 different offshoots of Zack's main timeline. One where he tries to get a cure for Cloud from Shinra headquarters, and one where he attempts to stop Biggs from blowing up Reactor 6, and in both timelines, he's gunned down by a squad of Shinra troops, exactly as he was at the end of Crisis Core. Is that the game's way of telling us that no matter what happens, one way or another, that's how Zack's story will always end? What will happen to the versions of Aerith and Cloud in Zack's timeline? Zack is in his own world, literally, for much of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, but he does have some familiar faces around him, of course. In addition to the likes of Biggs, Marlene, Elmira, Zack's story also ropes in versions of Aerith and Cloud who belong to that timeline. Neither is in great shape, to say the least, with Aerith being in a coma after Avalanche's failed escape attempt at Midgar, and Cloud being heavily Mako-poisoned and zonked out of his mind. So what exactly will become of these 2 in particular? Are both of them going to die, or is Zack going to indeed try to join both timelines the way that Rebirth's ending seemed to imply? Are there just going to be 2 Clouds? Will Zack's version of Aerith end up dying because of her death in the main timeline? Or will, conversely, that end up being how Aerith returns to the original timeline? Speaking of which, can Aerith be brought back? Whether or not Aerith would still die in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was one of our biggest questions heading into the game, and though we do now know that she died in similar fashion to how she died in the original game, there also seems to be hints that perhaps she's not permanently gone. For starters, we do see her spirit not only lingering on, but even having entire conversations with Cloud, promising him that she will stay behind in the Forgotten Capital to try and stop Meteor. Sure, you might dismiss that as more Mako-addled hallucinations drummed up by Cloud's increasingly deteriorating mental state, since no one else in the party can see her, but Red 13 does very faintly sense her presence, so maybe Cloud isn't going crazy in this particular case. More on this in a bit. So, does that mean there's still a way to bring Aith back? At the very least, even if she does remain dead, it seems like she'll have more of a role to play, albeit in spirit form, in the trilogy's third part than she did in that part of the original game's story. But could the party try and bring her back as well? Will Zack have a say in that? Will the multiverse and its different timelines and their many different versions of Aith who are still alive end up being the way out from death for that character? Or will the lesson once again be that destiny cannot be defied, and even if Aith does manage to have a larger presence following her death than she did in the original game, she is still going to remain conclusively dead? How did Sephiroth gain control of the Whispers? The Whispers were Final Fantasy VII Remake's big, main twist to a familiar story, and though they return in Rebirth, they do so in a different capacity. Originally described as mysterious beings who want to ensure that everything happens in the manner that it was prescribed, in Rebirth, Sephiroth has gained control over them, or a faction of them at any rate. Being outright summoned by Sephiroth from time to time, the Black Whisperers seem to be answering to him now, while multiple times we also see them going up against new, white versions of the Whispers. Of course, the question, or one of them at least, is, how exactly did Sephiroth manage to gain control of the Black Whispers? In the first game, he very clearly did not align with what their ultimate goal was. He constantly prodded Cloud into defying destiny and pulled the strings so that they would be defeated by the party. Are we to assume that after their defeat, the Whispers in their weakened state fell under Sephiroth's influence and now just do his bidding? Also, what the hell is going on with those White Whispers? Who controls the White Whispers? A little more than halfway into Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, we're introduced to a White Whispers. After Tifa falls into the livestream, she witnesses the weapons coming under attack from Sephiroth's Whispers, only for white, lustrous variants of the Whispers to come streaming in and start battling against the black counterparts to protect them. From that point forward, the White Whispers show up several more times and at crucial points in the story, each time showing up to fight against the regular Black Whispers. For starts, where do they come from? Second, who controls them? Are they in service only to the planet and the livestream, or are they perhaps controlled by Aith, as the game strongly implies, and multiple times throughout the course of the party's multi-stage final boss fight against Sephiroth, where we see the White Whispers seemingly doing Aeth's bidding? Perhaps they're Whispers from a different timeline. Why can only Cloud see Aith and the Sky Rifts? Cloud's mental state has deteriorated significantly by the time Final Fantasy VII Rebirth comes to a close, thanks to a double whammy of Sephiroth's corrupting influence and Cloud's own degradation. So when he is the only one in the entire party who can see Aeth's spirit after her death, and also see the Great Rift in the sky, clearly the game wants us to wonder whether he's just continuing to lose his grip on reality. Thanks to Zack's side of the story, however, we know without a doubt that the rift in the sky is very real, while Red 13 being able to sort of sense Aeth's presence at the end suggests that she isn't just a hallucination either. But why is it that Cloud is the only one who can see these things? Is it because of the connection to Sephiroth? Is it because now that he's traveled through the timelines once, he's now capable of being able to see things that weren't visible to him before? Sort of how nobody in Remake could see the Whispers until they came into contact with Aith. Or perhaps there's some other answer to this question that we can't even begin to guess at yet. What really happened with the Gi? Just as in the original game, in FF7 Rebirth, upon entering Cosmo Canyon, Cloud and Co. accompany Red 13 and Bugenhagen into the place where the spirits of the ancient extraterrestrial tribe known as the Gi are locked away. And just like the original game, this is where we learn about Red 13's father Sethro, and the sacrifice that he made to protect the people of Cosmo Canyon. But as opposed to the original, in Rebirth, that's just a fraction of what we find out, thanks to the new revelation that the black materia was built by the Gi as part of their conflict. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth does an excellent job of fleshing out this conflict, which had next to no role to play in the original game's story, and it gives us both sides of this perspective. In Cosmo Canyon, we know how they were betrayed, while in the Forgotten City, we hear from the ancients about how the Gi created the black materia with the most destructive of intentions. But which side of the story is the more accurate version of the truth? And on top of that, exactly how is the deal that Cloud strikes with the Gi going to come back to bite him in the future? Because there's no way that the Gi are going to be happy when they find out that Cloud never had any intention of giving them the black materia. What role will the Gi play in Part 3? The Gi tribe had a much larger part to play in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's story than it did in the original game, and it's looking like something of a guarantee that this will continue to be the case in Part 3 as well. After all, they're the creators of the Black Materia, which means they're inherently much more important to the lore. While in the remake trilogy, Cloud & Co. also lied to Gi Natak's face when they told him that they would bring the Black Materia back to him and the tribe, something they obviously have no intention of doing, given the fact that the Gi want to destroy the planet. So what exactly is that going to lead to in the third game? That the Gi will return is looking like a sure bet, but it also seems safe to assume that they're going to be pissed at the party, to say the very least. They're going to continue their hunt for the Black Materia, so given that their goals are more or less aligned with Sephiroth wants to do, are we headed to a deadly alliance between them? Will we fight the weapons? Final Fantasy VII Rebirth introduces these massive creatures created by the planet itself to protect it. Sensing that such a danger is looming on the horizon, at this point in the remake's trilogy, some of them have awakened, and at several points in the story they have an important role to play. That they return in the third game is obvious, but will they end up playing the same role they did in the original game? In the original, thanks to a magical barrier erected by Sephiroth, they are unable to sense his presence and instead go on a rampage, targeting locations with the highest Mako concentrations, which of course happen to be densely populated urban hubs like Midgar and Junon. To stop them, Cloud and company end up having to take them on in battle and defeat them. Given how epic boss fights against them would be if properly realized in the remake's trilogy, the developer might not want to change their role too much. But perhaps towards the end of the story, instead of being destroyed, they might work against Sephiroth? Just as an example, if the Gi do indeed end up allying with Sephiroth, maybe they could help even the odds for the good guys. Hey, did you know that we at Gaming Bolt upload new videos every day? Stick around, drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell, and let us know what kind of content you'd like to see in the future with a comment below.